I've always said that land has memory, not just in some poetic, flowery way, but real memory. You work it with your hands, you bleed on it, sweat into it, bury generations of work into the soil. It remembers. So when someone shows up acting like it's theirs just because they've got a clipboard and a smug little HOA logo on their vest, I tend to get twitchy. I inherited Copper Meadow Ranch from my father when I was 28, third-generation cattleman, born into dust and iron. 200 acres of open pasture, rolling hills, an old barn that smells like motor oil and alfalfa, and a workshop I built myself. It ain't glamorous, but it's mine, and it's paid for with the kind of work that bends your spine before you're 40. I've got fencing that stretches further than most folks can see, and a handshake lease with the local college for some environmental survey plots out near the creek bed. They bring students in, walk around with their little sensors, nod at things I don't understand. They stay out of my way, and I stay out of theirs. Works fine. That peace started dying the moment Clear Winds Community broke ground a half-mile east. What used to be wheat fields and mule deer trails became prefabs and smug marketing about sustainable living with panoramic ranch views. Next thing I know, they're paving over cow paths and sticking ornamental rocks where no damn rock ever belonged. The place went up fast, row after row of identical homes with gray paint and zero soul, managed by something called the Clear Winds Homeowners Association. I didn't think much of it until they started acting like the fence line between us was a formality. First came the signs, bright orange sandwich boards that said, "Private Road, Residents Only," planted at the turnoff to my ranch access, which is, by the way, a county-maintained gravel road that's been there since the Eisenhower administration. Then, a couple of construction crews started leaving their lunch trash, foam containers, soda cans, even a goddamn diaper, by my main gate. One morning I found a Prius half-blocking the entrance while someone took selfies with a cow over the fence. I let it slide. I'm not the guy who goes full old man yells at cloud over every little annoyance. I figured once the dust settled, they'd stick to their sidewalks and spin classes and leave me and my pasture alone. Then came the first letter, neatly folded, HOA seal on top, delivered not by the mail, but hand-slipped under my gate chain like a mafia threat. We believe that your property, bordering the HOA of Clear Winds, should adhere to the environmental aesthetic of our eco-community. Failure to align may result in sanctions. Consider formal association membership to avoid unnecessary escalation. HOA Council. Now, I've been called stubborn, pig-headed, even uncooperative, usually by women I've dated and one very annoyed banker, but I've never been stupid. That letter wasn't a suggestion. It was a shot across the bow. I didn't respond. Instead, I dug up my land deed, photocopied the page that clearly states the ranch was established in county records in 1953, circled the legal boundary lines in red Sharpie, and pinned it to the fence facing their side. Underneath, I tacked a post-it note. Private property. Not for sale. Not interested. GB. You'd think that'd be the end of it. That reasonable people would see a firm no and move on. But Clear Winds wasn't built on reason. It was built on arrogance, engineered like their HOA bylaws to expand, consume, and homogenize everything in reach. It didn't take long for the smiling to stop. The next week, a woman I would later learn was Karen Walsh, president of the HOA, Queen Bee of Clear Winds, showed up in a lavender windbreaker and oversized sunglasses, snapping pictures of my tractor path from across the ditch. She didn't say a word, just stared, scribbled in her notebook, then got into her Lexus SUV and rolled off like she was documenting a crime scene. A day later, I got a second letter. This one stapled to my mailbox post. Same tone, slightly less polite. You have failed to take corrective action. Your property presents aesthetic challenges to the adjacent Clear Winds community. This includes, but is not limited to, unsightly fencing, excessive livestock presence, and non-conforming landscape maintenance. We urge you to consider cooperation. HOA. They listed excessive livestock like the cows were a nuisance raccoon problem. Still, I didn't flinch. I wasn't about to let a group of HOA warriors tell me how many cows I could own on a property that's been in my family longer than any of them have been alive. I talked to Sheriff Tate. He laughed and said, "They've got zero jurisdiction, Garrett. Ignore them unless they step foot on your land." So I did, until they did. It was a Tuesday morning, dry and hot. The kind of day when the dust sticks to your skin like sawdust, and even the cows give you side-eye for working past noon. I was out by the south fence, tightening some line where a post had leaned from last winter's snowdrift, when I noticed them. 3 SUVs, shiny and spotless, too clean for ranch roads, crawled up the drive like they owned the place. I set down the fence stretcher and walked back toward the house, boots crunching over gravel. By the time I got close, they were already out, 6 of them, in matching polos with the Clear Winds HOA logo embroidered over the chest like some kind of damn corporate cult. 2 women, 4 men. One of them had a clipboard, another was holding an iPad, and the rest were scanning my property like they were casing it for a heist. "Morning," I said flatly, keeping my hands on my belt, not because I was worried, but because that's what my father used to do when strangers showed up uninvited. A tall guy with sunburned ears and a too-white smile stepped forward. "Mr. Baines, I presume?" "You presume right. We're here conducting an environmental inspection related to community-adjacent property impact," he said, as if I should be impressed. "We're part of Clear Winds Environmental Standards Committee." "That's so." I looked past him. One of the women was already taking pictures of my barn. "You folks got a warrant or just bad manners?" He blinked, caught off guard by the pushback. "Oh, this is just an informal review. We're not law enforcement. We're here to help." "You're trespassing," I said. "This here is private land, and I didn't invite you." Another guy, short, wiry, with a Bluetooth in his ear and a clipboard in hand, stepped up. "We're issuing a temporary compliance notice," he said, as if reading from a script. "There are several areas of concern: rusted metal structures, non-composted manure, visible disrepair of auxiliary buildings." I raised a hand. "You're reading that like you've done it before. How many properties you walk onto without permission handing out this garbage?" He paused, didn't answer. The clipboard guy flipped a page and held it out to me. "If you address these violations within 30 days, we can recommend non-penalizing integration into the HOA." I didn't take the paper. "You people not getting it?" I said, voice low now. "This ranch isn't part of your little utopia. It never was, never will be. You want to play homeowners association war games? Take it back to your side of the line." The woman with the iPad spoke up for the first time. "If you don't address the issues, we'll be forced to escalate. Clear Winds reserves the right to maintain environmental harmony within a reasonable boundary of influence." "Boundary of influence?" I repeated. "You got that out of a book or pulled it out of your ass?" They didn't like that. A couple of them shifted uncomfortably. I could tell they weren't used to being talked to without fear. Most folks probably folded the moment they got their first fine. I pulled my phone out and started recording. "Just so we're clear, this is being documented. You're on my land, without permission, issuing fraudulent orders. You want to escalate? So will I." One of the guys, bald, thick neck, the kind of man who probably flexes in the mirror when no one's watching, stepped forward, took a picture of me, and said, You're making this harder than it needs to be. I stepped closer. You better get back in your cars before you end up making this a criminal matter. Another long pause. They looked at each other. Some quiet muttering. I saw hesitation now, the shine wearing off their uniforms and self-importance. Clipboard guy held out the paper one more time. You've been notified. I didn't even look at it. I turned and walked back toward the house. I heard their shoes crunching gravel as they followed, but I didn't stop. They climbed back into their SUVs eventually and backed down the drive without another word. Later that afternoon, I sent the video to the sheriff's department and filed an official trespassing report. I even attached the letter they'd left behind, with all their fake language and veiled threats. The response? A 2-line email that boiled down to, "We'll look into it." That night, I sat on my porch with a beer and a bad mood. The sun was setting red and low behind the pasture, casting long shadows across the dry grass. I kept thinking about the way that clipboard guy talked, so sure of himself, like I was just another patch of land waiting to be converted into mulch-covered conformity. I called up Brandon. We hadn't spoken much in recent years. He got out of this town, moved up in law enforcement, made something of himself, but he still picked up on the second ring. "Brandon," I said, "you ever seen a pack of bureaucrats try to annex a ranch with a clipboard?" He laughed. "Sounds like I'm about to." "Come out this weekend," I told him. "Bring Lisa, bring a cooler. Might be time for a refresher on what property lines mean." "I'll bring the beer and my badge," he said. And just like that, I didn't feel so alone on that porch anymore. The sound woke me before the sun did. It wasn't the usual ranch sounds, no coyotes, no restless cattle or creaking wood. This was mechanical, deep and angry. A low rumble that made the window panes vibrate in their frames. I sat up, swung my boots on, and grabbed the rifle by the door more out of habit than fear. Out here, when something sounds off, it usually is. By the time I stepped onto the porch, the dust cloud had already risen above the tree line like a brown, choking storm. What rolled through it made my stomach twist. 10 garbage trucks, not county sanitation, not the usual backroad haulers. These were industrial behemoths, big, white, city-grade dumpers with blacked-out windows, unmarked doors, and drivers that looked like they hadn't smiled since the Bush administration. They came up the main drive in a slow, deliberate line, like a goddamn funeral procession. Except they weren't burying anything. They were here to dump. I stormed down the steps and into the drive, waving my arms. "Hey, this is private property. Turn it around." The lead truck didn't stop. It veered right around me, slow enough that I could see the driver's face. Sunglasses, chewing a toothpick. Didn't look at me, didn't blink. Just kept going. Truck after truck followed suit, like they'd rehearsed it. They spread out across the edge of my field near the old north barn. Engines still growling as hydraulics hissed and truck beds began to rise. And then the garbage came. Bags, furniture, splintered wood, drywall, scrap metal, insulation foam, even broken ceramic tiles and pieces of toilets. One load dumped what looked like the remains of an entire kitchen remodel. Cabinets, countertops, even a fridge door with magnets still on it. I ran to the nearest driver as he climbed out of his rig, holding a manila envelope like it was a legal document. I shouted over the noise, "What the hell are you doing?" He held out the envelope like it was a court order. "Delivery, Property Improvement Initiative." I snatched it from his hand. The envelope was stamped with the HOA crest. Inside was a single sheet that read, "Since you've declined formal cooperation with the Clear Winds community, we are proceeding with independent corrective action. This is a demonstration of non-compliance consequences. Enjoy your sample of the future." No signature. Just that smug, embossed HOA logo in the corner. You son of a—" I didn't finish the sentence. I turned and saw another load being dumped 5 feet from my hay shed. I did what any sane man would do when 10 strange trucks invade his land and turn it into a landfill. I sprinted to the house, grabbed my phone, dialed the sheriff's department, and then grabbed my .30 caliber off the rack. I didn't point it at anyone. I'm not stupid. But I sure as hell made sure they saw it slung over my shoulder when I marched back out to the drive. That's when Brandon stepped out of the guest house. He was barefoot, in sweats, and a t-shirt that said, "I serve, you complain," a gift I'd given him years back. His hair was messy, and his wife Lisa stood behind him on the porch, robe wrapped tight, eyes wide. "Garrett," he called out, blinking like he wasn't sure if this was real. "What the hell is going on?" "Your weekend getaway just turned into a crime scene," I said. "Grab your badge." Brandon stared at the trucks, at the spreading mounds of trash, at the HOA letter in my hand. His jaw clenched. "This is felony illegal dumping. On private land," he muttered, already pulling his phone out. "I'm calling in backup. You stay calm. Don't shoot anybody unless they shoot first." "I'm not the one breaking the law," I growled. Within minutes, the cavalry started arriving. First came 2 patrol cars from the local station. Then came the county sheriff's office with lights flashing, tires skidding to a stop in a cloud of dust. By the time the state environmental unit showed up in their green and white Suburbans, the garbage trucks were parked, drivers standing around like they were waiting for coffee and donuts. One deputy started interviewing drivers. Another cordoned off the area near the barn with yellow tape. Brandon was barking into his phone, rattling off codes I didn't recognize, but I could tell it was serious. Then came the first break. One of the drivers, apparently the least smart of the bunch, told a deputy that the order came from some lady in Clear Winds. He didn't know her name, just that she gave him a cash envelope and said to follow the map. Another was caught holding a fake disposal authorization form with my forged signature at the bottom. It even had my address and phone number, but the formatting was all wrong. Someone had tried to make it look official, but to anyone who'd seen real paperwork, it screamed amateur hour. The state inspectors began photographing everything. Soil samples were taken. Every truck was impounded on the spot. Phones were seized. Drivers were cuffed, read their rights, and loaded into cruisers while still protesting that they were just hired labor. I stood at the edge of my field, fists clenched, the sun finally up and baking the trash in a way that made my nose curl. Lisa brought me a cup of coffee. Brandon walked over and handed me a copy of the fake form. "I think it's safe to say," he said, "they just declared war." I nodded, my voice low. They came to the wrong battlefield. The ranch smelled like a landfill for 3 days. Even with the trucks gone and the drivers behind bars, I couldn't step outside without gagging. The summer heat cooked the mess they left behind until it turned the air thick and sour. I watched buzzards circle over my hay shed like they were expecting something to die. Hell, maybe something had, buried under all that broken drywall and mildew-stuffed carpet. But the tide had turned. You could feel it in the way the sheriff's deputies walked the perimeter now, heads high instead of weary. You could hear it in Brandon's voice, short, clipped, furious. He took this personally. Not just because it happened on his friend's land, but because it was the kind of organized abuse that made honest cops look useless if it went unchecked. On the 3rd night, I got a call from Deputy Linney. "We arrested 2 more this morning," she said. "Construction contractors from Cheyenne. Got records showing they were paid through a slush fund linked to Clear Winds HOA." I leaned back in my porch chair, boots crossed, and finally allowed myself the smallest smile I'd had in weeks. "Did they talk?" "They lawyered up," she said. "But it's unraveling. One of them asked for a deal. Gave us the name of the woman who hired him, Karen Walsh." No more shadows. No more vague threats. We had a name, on record, tied to an actual felony. That same day, HOA President Karen Walsh officially stepped down temporarily, pending internal review. They called it voluntary. Every news station in the region called it what it was, a PR decapitation. Clear Winds issued a weak press release full of buzzwords like accountability, community values, and moving forward. I wiped my ass with it. The best part came later that week, when an old man in a faded fishing vest showed up at my gate and introduced himself as Simon Reeves. "I was on the Clear Winds board until last year," he said, clutching a file folder like it was radioactive. "Karen forced me out when I asked too many questions about budget discrepancies. I've been waiting for someone to finally punch back." I let him onto the porch, gave him some sweet tea, and listened. Turned out Simon wasn't just a disgruntled neighbor. He was an accountant, and one hell of a meticulous one. He'd kept copies of internal memos, board votes that were never held, expense reports that didn't match bank statements, and one particular memo where Karen directly proposed reallocating HOA beautification funds toward strategic environmental enforcement actions. Strategic, environmental, enforcement. Sounded a hell of a lot like funding garbage raids and fake inspectors. I brought in Candace Redd, a local attorney who'd worked with landowners against zoning overreach. She was blunt, sharp as a railroad spike, and took one look at Simon's folder before saying, "This isn't just civil. This is criminal conspiracy." She drafted a suit within 2 days, naming Karen Walsh, several board members, and the HOA itself as co-defendants. Fraud, trespassing, environmental dumping, forgery, attempted extortion. It read like a menu of legal revenge. Media picked up the story like wildfire. Local rancher vs. rogue HOA became the headline of the week. I got invited to give an interview on a conservative AM radio station, which I did in my barn, with a rooster crowing in the background for dramatic effect. For the first time since this started, it felt like I wasn't playing defense. It felt like the system was waking up, stretching its arms, and remembering who it was supposed to protect. Then the knock came. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. I opened the door expecting another deputy or reporter. Instead, a courier in a dark green jacket handed me a manila envelope, nodded, and walked back to his car without a word. Inside was a legal notice, heavy cream paper, embossed seal in the corner. Not from Clear Winds. From a company I'd never heard of, Ecofront Holdings, LLC. The letter claimed I was in violation of Section 8A of the Community Ecological Transition Zone Standards and demanded immediate cessation of all agricultural activity within the Clear Winds Peripheral Impact Zone. They were suing me for polluting their eco-corridor. The kicker? They weren't suing under HOA rules. They were suing as a private environmental firm. I passed the letter to Candace, who raised an eyebrow and muttered, "Cute." She did a background check. Ecofront Holdings had been incorporated 4 days prior. The registered address? A shared office suite in Casper. The managing officer listed on the articles of incorporation? J. Walsh. Karen. In a new mask. The HOA might have been bleeding, but Karen had just crawled out from under it with fresh lipstick and a new set of fangs. The war wasn't over. She'd just changed uniforms, and I was already reloading. By the time we figured out what Ecofront really was, the smell of trash had finally lifted from my fields. But something uglier had taken its place. Candace said it best when she looked over the fake lawsuit from Ecofront and muttered, "This isn't about property anymore. It's about control. And she's still trying to take yours." Karen hadn't just switched masks, she'd dug in smarter. Ecofront was a shell, but it gave her plausible deniability. No HOA ties, no community optics, just a concerned environmental agency, looking to preserve ecological balance. She'd weaponized the language of green living into a tactical nuke aimed at my operation. We needed to counter fast, and thank God for Simon Reeves. Simon started digging like a man possessed. He pulled out archived emails, financial spreadsheets, and even an internal memo where Karen had personally approved the transfer of HOA reserve funds, almost $60,000, to an unaffiliated contractor for community enhancement. The EDE contractor? A company called Broad Tree Solutions. Guess who their registered legal rep was? Karen's husband. That alone would have been enough to warrant an ethics probe, but Simon wasn't done. He also gave us access to the HOA's internal voting records, or, more accurately, the lack thereof. According to the bylaws, any structural fund usage over $5,000 required a full board vote. Not a single one had been documented in over a year. Simon said it plain. She's been running that place like a monarchy. Candace filed a supplementary suit the same day, and Brandon passed everything to the county DA's office. The pressure was building, and we felt it. But Karen wasn't folding. No, she was preparing her next move. And she knew where to hit hardest. The court hearing for the Eco-Front injunction was scheduled faster than we expected. Too fast. Candace smelled it immediately. "This is off," she said, flipping through the scheduling documents. This got approved with almost no delay. And the judge? Marcus Whitman. The name meant nothing to me. To Candace, it meant red flags. Whitman's known for siding with developers, real estate associations. He's had 3 decisions overturned in the past 2 years for procedural irregularities. I wouldn't trust him to hold a dog-washing fundraiser without violating due process. We filed a motion for recusal. It got denied. No explanation, just a short sentence. Motion considered and rejected. That was when Brandon stepped in. He wasn't officially part of the investigation anymore, but being head of county law enforcement had its perks. He pulled some quiet favors, leaned on some friends in Cheyenne, and within 48 hours, we had a file. Judge Whitman's wife, Eileen, was listed as the communications consultant for the Clear Winds Beautification Initiative 2 years ago. Paid through an untraceable HOA grant fund. No formal contract. No declared compensation. Just a buried payout of over 20 grand. Brandon brought it to the state ethics board. The next morning, the local paper ran with the headline, HOA Scandal Deepens. Ties between judge and developer exposed. And suddenly, things started cracking. Whitman was temporarily suspended, pending investigation. The Eco-Front hearing? Postponed indefinitely. Karen's entire strategy took a direct hit to the engine. We didn't waste the momentum. Candace filed a 3rd complaint, this time directly with the Attorney General's office, accusing Clear Winds HOA and its affiliates of racketeering under state law. Brandon coordinated with the environmental inspector who'd been on my ranch during the dumping. They confirmed multiple drivers used forged state documents authorizing waste disposal, all traced back to one printer in a private office building leased by Eco-Front Holdings. In one of those surreal moments only real life can give you, Simon showed up at my ranch carrying a banker's box full of HOA board minutes on actual paper, grinning like a man who'd just rediscovered purpose in his retirement. "These aren't even real minutes," he said. "Karen wrote them all herself. Look at the signatures, photocopied, all of them." He handed me one that still smelled like toner. I stared at it and said, "She's not a president. She's a con artist with a stationary addiction." It was becoming clear. Karen hadn't just bent the rules, she'd rewritten them, forged them, and sold them as gospel. What she didn't count on was people like Simon and Candace, or me, for that matter. A guy who knew how to build a fence that kept things in or out. At this point, even the HOA board started splintering. One member, a woman named Cheryl Dubois, broke rank and issued a public statement. I joined Clear Winds to build community, not to strong-arm our neighbors. She resigned the next day and promised to cooperate with investigators. It was only a matter of time now. The cracks weren't just showing, they were swallowing the whole damn house. And Karen? She hadn't been seen in 2 weeks. But I had a gut feeling. She wasn't hiding. She was regrouping. The first real rain in weeks came the morning Judge Whitman got yanked off the case. Fitting, really. Felt like the sky itself was cleaning house. I was in the workshop replacing a busted alternator on the old ATV when Candace called. Didn't even say hello. "He's out," she said. "Interim judge appointed. We're back in business." I didn't ask how she found out so fast. Probably before his coffee even cooled. The same afternoon, the county prosecutor announced an official investigation into Clear Winds HOA, citing patterns of coercion, financial mismanagement, and illegal expansion attempts. Local news parked vans outside my fence line, cameras aimed at my fields like they expected a marching band. I stayed off TV, let the facts speak louder than my scowl. But Candace, bless her heart, gave them quotes sharp enough to cut tile. That night, I opened a beer, sat on the porch, and watched taillights snake out of the Clear Winds neighborhood. I counted 7 moving vans. Good riddance. The new judge, Riley Thompson, ex-military, no-nonsense reputation, didn't waste time. Within 48 hours, he authorized subpoenas for Ecofront Holdings, Clear Winds HOA, and Broad Tree Solutions, the shady contractor run by Karen's husband. When Thompson spoke in court, it was like gravel in a meat grinder. Calm, slow, final. The kind of voice that made liars sweat. Simon testified first. He walked in like a man 10 years younger, clutching a folder thicker than a phone book. Under oath, he laid it out. The forged votes, the duplicate board minutes, the misuse of funds, the unapproved surveillance measures on homeowners, the memos Karen tried to bury. Then came Cheryl Dubois, the board member who'd jumped ship. She described closed-door meetings where Karen pushed for strategic pressure on fringe owners. She used my name more than once. Next up were the residents Karen tried to bully. A retired vet named Hank, who'd been fined 8 times in 1 month for having a non-standard mailbox. A widow named Maria, whose vegetable garden was labeled unsanctioned landscaping. And then there was Curtis, the soft-spoken man who sold his lakeside property last year, cheap. Turns out he'd received anonymous letters warning of incoming environmental violation citations and non-compliance penalties. Same language as the threats I got. But the kicker? One of the letters still had a faint watermark. Clear Winds Community Outreach Program. Karen's fingerprints were all over this mess. And just when we thought it couldn't go deeper, the state's forensic techs found a deleted email chain between Karen and her husband discussing liability shielding via third-party incorporation. That's lawyer speak for, let's create Ecofront so it can take the heat if this backfires. It backfired. Judge Thompson didn't yell. He didn't pound his gavel. He just sat back, let the silence hang, then quietly said, "Proceed with criminal filings." Karen Walsh was arrested at her vacation home in Arizona 2 days later. 6 charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, illegal waste disposal, document forgery, abuse of public funds, coercion of elected officials, and criminal misrepresentation of corporate identity. Her husband was picked up not long after. The board of Clear Winds HOA voted, this time actually voted, to dissolve. The county took over management temporarily. An emergency audit was launched. The sheriff's department collected every device, folder, and hard drive from their community office. They found more than they bargained for. The best part? The state designated a restitution fund, paid from the seized HOA reserve accounts, first on the list for reimbursement. Me. They sent contractors, licensed, state-monitored, to clean every last trace of garbage from my property. They even reseeded the parts where the soil had been damaged. The place looked better than it did before this mess started. Still, I installed new fencing, metal posts, motion sensors, and a sign that said, "Private land. You are not welcome." Below that, a smaller one. HOA-free zone since 1953. The war wasn't just over. It was documented. The quiet hit harder than I expected. No more threats. No more envelopes slipped under the gate. No SUVs crawling past the fence line like vultures in neutral. Just the wind moving through the grass again, the cattle lowing in the distance, and the steady tick of the front porch ceiling fan spinning overhead. It had been 2 weeks since Karen's arrest. A week since the last contractor left, hauling away the final load of spoiled soil. The ranch was mine again, undisturbed, like none of this had ever happened. Except it had. And the land remembered. I spent a full Saturday repainting the old wooden sign at the entrance, the one my grandfather had hammered into the earth himself. The letters had faded to gray over the years, but now they stood proud again, black on fresh cedar. Copper Meadow Ranch. Private land. Since 1953. Below it, I added a new sign, just metal on chain. No HOA jurisdiction. Trespass equally prosecution. Violators will be photographed, mocked, and prosecuted in that order. Brandon laughed when he saw it. "Hell of a deterrent," he said, cracking open a beer on the tailgate of his cruiser. "You forgot to add Karen-free zone." "Too wordy," I said, "but I like the spirit." Lisa brought out sandwiches. Simon dropped by with a batch of homemade peach jam as a thank you. Even Cheryl showed up, quieter than usual, still processing the fallout, but determined to grow tomatoes without HOA approval for the rest of my life. We shared a toast to hard-earned freedom. Not just mine, everyone's. Freedom to plant what you want, to fix a fence without filing a permit, to own land and mean it. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I stood by the gate, arms crossed, watching a couple of New Clear Winds residents walk their dog down the road. They waved, hesitant but not hostile. I nodded back. Let the past lie. Then I walked back up the drive, boots in dirt, heart finally quiet. The war was over, and the fence still stood.